morning students. In this video, I shall discuss some important terminologies related to the chapter respiration because the terminologies are very much important for the understanding of the mechanism or the process. So that is why we must acquaint with these new terminologies associated with this particular chapter. Now, first of all, what is respiration? This respiration, it is the process, but it is not a physical process, but it is a biochemical process, and by which the first important thing is intake of oxygen. The oxygen is taken into our body, that is the first phase. Then releasing energy from food. As we know, normally the food after digestion converted into the simplest form, that is the glucose, and from the glucose the energy is released, and after releasing the energy, the byproduct or the waste product which is produced during this process, that is the carbon dioxide, and this carbon dioxide must be removed from the body. So the intake of oxygen, releasing energy from food, and removal of the waste material like a carbon dioxide is called respiration. So that is why this is the complete definition of this. Now next one, what is aerobic respiration? Aerobic respiration is the type of respiration in which the oxygen is utilized. Sometimes we say that it occurs in the presence of oxygen, but the presence or absence of oxygen, it does not make any sense, because if it is not utilized and if it is present, then what is the value of its presence? Because the oxygen is present, but oxygen is not utilized. So that is why utilization word is more appropriate here. So that is why the type of respiration in which oxygen is utilized for releasing the energy, or during respiration you can say, then that is called aerobic respiration. And normally it always occurs in the presence of oxygen, because if oxygen is not there, then no aerobic respiration can be possible. And another important thing is that their system must be such that the oxygen is utilized there in their system. So that is why the respiratory system and the availability of oxygen, these are essential for aerobic respiration. Now the next one, that is your anaerobic respiration. Now here, the type of respiration in which the oxygen is not utilized. Why? Why oxygen is not utilized? Because during aerobic respiration, 38 ATP molecules are produced from one molecule of glucose. So if it is so much efficient, then why this oxygen is not utilized by some organisms? Because in some organisms, the system is not so well developed that they can use the or utilize the oxygen. For example, in case of bacteria, their system is not so well developed, so that is why they cannot utilize. They cannot use oxygen, or they cannot utilize oxygen, because the oxygen may be there in the atmosphere, but they cannot utilize because their system is not such type or not well developed. But sometimes, what when it occurs in case of yeast or in case of bacteria. But some organisms like human being, we have our muscle cells, and the muscle cell has the power to utilize the oxygen to release energy, but in the absence of oxygen, sometimes in the lack of oxygen, due to lack of oxygen during some rigorous exercise, what happens? The muscles perform the anaerobic respiration to release energy. Of course, very less amount of energy, only 2 ATP molecules are produced during this process. It may be your alcoholic fermentation which occurs in the yeast, or it may be your lactic acid fermentation which occurs in the muscle cells when the oxygen supply is scanty or less. Now next one, that is the breathing. What is breathing and how does it occur in case of higher organisms? Now, breathing is the process. It is normally a physical process, or it is commonly called the external respiration. It is called external respiration. And during this process, what happens? Only exchange of gases occur. That is the intake of oxygen. The oxygen is taken into the body, and removal of carbon dioxide. And the waste product which is produced, that is the carbon dioxide, and this carbon dioxide removed from the body. So this process is called breathing. And this breathing is commonly called the external respiration, and it includes two phases. That is the inspiration, that means intake of oxygen into the body, or intake of air along with oxygen. Then expiration, that is the removal of the carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide rich air to the atmosphere. This is called expiration. Then one inspiration and one expiration includes one breathing. And the breathing rate is normally your 12 to 18 times per minute in case of healthy human being. So it may be much faster when we do rigorous exercise in frightened conditions, in excited conditions, but normal breathing rate is this, and it may increase or decrease according to the need. Now next one, that is the fermentation. Then what is this fermentation? This fermentation is the other term used for anaerobic respiration. And during this anaerobic respiration, what happens? The oxygen is not utilized. So when oxygen is not utilized, then the energy is released from the food material like is glucose is very less. Only 2 ATP molecules are produced from 1 molecule of glucose. So this process of releasing of very less amount of energy without utilizing the oxygen, this is also called the fermentation. And this fermentation, which occurs 2 types. First one, that is the alcoholic fermentation. This alcoholic fermentation occurs in yeast, and the end product is the ethyl alcohol. Ethyl alcohol. And this ethyl alcohol, which is C2H5OH, it is the end product, and the glucose molecule is not completely utilized, or it is partially broken down. So that is why only 2 ATP molecules are produced, and the C2H5OH or ethyl alcohol is produced in case of yeast, and that is why it is called alcoholic fermentation. But in case of muscle cells, when the oxygen supply is not sufficient, then it is called lactic acid fermentation. And now the lactic acid is the end product, and that is why the glucose molecule produce only 2 molecules of ATP, and it is also a partial breakdown of the glucose molecule, and now lactic acid is the end product, and that is why it is called lactic acid fermentation. Now the stomata. Now what are stomata? Now the tiny holes, the small openings you can say, which are present in the leaves, normally in the leaves of the plant and in the soft stems, through which the exchange of gases occur. The oxygen enters into the leaf and the carbon dioxide comes out of the leaf through these small openings, and normally there are special cells called the guard cells. Actually these guard cells, they form the stomata. Suppose this is one guard cell and this is another guard cell, and these 2 guard cells, they have a little opening in between them. So these are the guard cells, and this is the stomata. And this stomata actually helps in the exchange of gases into the leaf. Now, in a plant, there are thousands of stomata in each leaf, and there are thousands of leaves in each plant. So that is why we do not observe actually directly how much oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanging there. But actually a lot of oxygen and carbon dioxide they are continuously exchanging with the leaf and the atmosphere. Now next one, that is the lenticels. These are the small openings which are present in the hard and woody stem. Normally the hard and woody stem, they have the outer covering called the bark, and in the bark there are these small openings present through which the exchange of gases, mostly the oxygen and carbon dioxide occurs, and the oxygen enters into the stem cells which are present deep inside the stem. So these are called the lenticels. They help in the exchange of gases, you can say that is the respiration process. Now, hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is one of the most important molecules which is present in the higher animal. And these molecules are normally present in the RBC of the blood. These are the molecules which are present in the RBC, red blood corpuscles of the blood, and which helps in the transport of oxygen. The oxygen is actually entered into our body, into the lungs, but the oxygen is required in each and every cell. So that is why this oxygen is to be transported from the lungs to all cells of the body. So that is why this hemoglobin molecule, which is also called the oxygen carrier, which is also called the respiratory pigment. There are so many names called that respiratory pigment, or they are also called the oxygen carriers. These are also called the oxygen carriers, and they carry the oxygen from lungs to all parts of the body through the blood, because they are present inside this blood that is called a blood cell called RBC. Now, these are also known as respiratory pigment. Now, the diffusion. The exchange of gases occurs by the process of this diffusion. Then what is diffusion? This is the movement of molecules from higher concentration to the lower concentration. Whatever molecules which are present in a region, if their concentration is more somewhere and less some other, so that is why the movement always occurs from the higher concentration towards the lower concentration. So this process of movement of the molecules from higher concentration towards the lower concentration, it is called your diffusion. It is one of the most important process by which the exchange of so many things or so many molecules, so many substances occurs in the living system. Now, anemia. It is a condition occurs when the oxygen carrying capacity is normally decreased or reduced due to less amount of hemoglobin pigment. Sometimes in some organisms, the amount of hemoglobin or the level of hemoglobin is less or decreases by some reason or due to some reason. That at that time the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood is decreases. When the oxygen carrying capacity decreases, what happens? The sufficient amount of oxygen will not reach to the cell, so sufficient amount of energy is not released there. So that is why we feel the shortage of energy in our body. So that is why this is the condition when the hemoglobin pigments are less in number. But sometimes another condition occurs, that is called carbon monoxide poisoning. Then what is this carbon monoxide poisoning and when it occurs? Normally this is a condition occurs when more amount of carbon monoxide is present in the atmospheric gases. And this is called carbon monoxide poisoning. And this carbon monoxide poisoning it occurs when more carbon monoxide is there in the atmosphere. So the affinity of the affinity of the hemoglobin with carbon monoxide is more. The affinity of carbon monoxide to bind with hemoglobin pigment is more in comparison to oxygen. So that means what? When oxygen and carbon monoxide are there, then the hemoglobin pigment will bind to carbon monoxide and not to oxygen. So that is why this pigment, which is actually, or hemoglobin, which is actually meant for transport of oxygen, but if carbon monoxide is there, it binds with the carbon monoxide and form the carboxyhemoglobin, and due to this carboxyhemoglobin formation, the oxygen carrying capacity is now decreased, because the same molecule which was meant to transport the oxygen is now engaged with carbon monoxide, and its affinity is more, so that is why it do not separate from one another. So in this condition, what happened? Normally the oxygen carrying capacity decreases, then the energy releasing capacity decreases, and this condition is called carbon monoxide poisoning, because all the hemoglobin pigment, they are involved with carbon monoxide. And sometimes due to this condition, death of the organism also occurs. So this is called carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, this much for the day. I hope these terminologies will definitely useful for you for your better understanding to this respiration chapter. And if it is really useful for you, then please like it and subscribe for further videos. Thank you.